Welcome to tonight's last event in our 2018-19 speaker series. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jennifer Blake, the District's Director of Communication and Outreach, and I am thrilled to have a pretty full room with us here in June at a very busy time of year. As Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky said, this evening's panel discussion is scheduled to take 1 hour. It is only an hour because there are lots of competing events in the district at this time of year, so we want to be really cognizant of people's time. Our time tonight, however, will allow us to lay the groundwork for future conversations around diversity and inclusion in our schools. Tonight is a beginning conversation, and the questions answered by our panel are intended to establish a common understanding and a foundation for our work moving forward into next school year. The information shared tonight will not be specific to any one topic related to diversity and inclusion, but we look forward to those conversations in the future. Before we officially begin, I again want to thank you for joining us. I'd also like to thank our panel members who are here with us tonight for their willingness to have this conversation. Their willingness to share personal experience and perspective takes courage. And I know I don't have to remind you of this, but I am asking the audience to be respectful and courteous of the various perspectives that you'll hear tonight on the panel and those that you often see represented in our schools. Tonight's presentation is being video recorded, and it will air on GVTV and be available on our website for people who were unable to attend, or if you'd like to go back and listen to the conversation again. So welcome, panel members. If we could begin with Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky and then just go through each of you. Could you introduce yourself to our community and include how long you've been in Great Valley and why this topic is of particular interest to you?
Absolutely. I'm Regina Speaker Paulo Pinsky. I'm the superintendent at Great Valley School District, and I have been in the district for 4 years. This topic has been of incredible interest to me, and actually I think I speak for the whole Great Valley staff, administrators, teachers, as the ultimate goal is for everyone in our community, internally and externally, to feel as though they belong, their voice is valued, and their perspective is valued. And to that end, we see a lot of big picture things, but at the end of the day, I have opportunities to speak to different folks at different forums, and we have a lot of work to do in making sure that every individual feels as though they belong. So this is incredibly passionate work for me. I've said repeatedly that I look at every child as though they personally belong to me, and I would never want my child to feel as though they didn't belong in a place where they spend a large majority of their time. So I'm really looking forward in getting to know personal stories and doing the work together as we move forward.
Hi, my name's Tia Giles. I have been in the district for 13 years now. I am the mother of 2 girls. I've got a 6th grader at the middle school and a 4th grader at Charlestown Elementary. So my family and I were one of very few African-American families in the district, or we can even say diverse families in the district. I can share some of my experiences a little bit later today, but that's where my passion comes from.
I'm Samantha Swan. I'm a board member. I've been a school board member here for the past 2 years. I've been in the district for 20 years as a parent. I have a daughter who graduated in 2016 and a son who is graduating next week. I have seen a lot of change in our district over the 20 years that I've been here, from when my kids were in elementary school at Katie Markley and went to Heritage Night in 1st and 2nd grade for the first time, to where we are today. I've seen the diversity in our district grow. I think it's great. I think it makes our community a richer community. It helps prepare our kids for the world, which is a diverse place. And I want to make sure that we welcome that diversity into our schools and that we are appropriately educating our children and our community around the value of that diversity and respect for that diversity. And that's why I came to this. I'll also say that as a Jewish parent in this district, I am a minority. I have one more week in the district, right, as a parent. And I've had to deal with things when my kids were littler, where things were scheduled over holidays, important school events and things. And I know that diversity is experienced differently for everybody, but it was painful for me. And I know there's other things like that for other people. We have, like I said, a great diversity, and I want to make sure that it's all understood and respected.
Good evening, I'm Joanna Wexler, Director of Pupil Services for Great Valley. I've been with the district for 5 years. My background is that I'm a school psychologist prior to becoming an administrator. Our Department of Pupil Services supports the adults that support the students with special education needs, and then we also support the individuals such as our counselors, school social workers, psychologists, those folks that are, in the building supporting school climate and culture and really working with students who do come to us with diverse learning, social, and/or behavioral needs. So in this work, I think, my goal for being in a leadership position to support the adults and, of course, the students is just to continue to build capacity within our staff to be really equipped to service the diversity that we see in our classrooms that, as was mentioned, is really rich and wonderful, but it does create new opportunities for, I think, the adults in the system to learn and grow and how to respond to that.
So hello, my name is Diana Tiburcio. I'm a student. I've been in Great Valley for 11 years, so I'm currently a junior. And my experience is I'm first generation from Mexico, so both of my parents were born and raised in Mexico. So I came in, and in elementary school, I was going through the ESL system myself. And now that I'm in the high school ages, I'm tutoring the ESL students as well, so I'm helping them with that language barrier and helping them be more acclimated to our environment and everything. And I'm also part of the Latino Student Union and the Multicultural Student Union, so I can hear some of their stories through those clubs. And so yeah, that's my part of the community.
Thanks to all of you again. Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky, recent conversations around budget, enrollment, and facilities have included reference to a growth in our overall population. Could you share more with us about that growth and if it has also reflected changes in our demographics?
Absolutely. The growth, and all it takes is to be in a hurry and drive on Route 30 or Lancaster Avenue, and you realize that our infrastructure is not necessarily keeping up with our growth. We are growing exponentially, which is very honestly a great problem to have. But in light of that reality, we have recently embarked on a feasibility study to look at capacity of our facilities, our current condition of our facilities, and then where we will need to grow moving forward. With that, we're really motivated to be strategic about that growth and be strategic about meeting that need. In looking at the growth, we also have, as was mentioned, a drastically changing demographic. The largest growing demographic population is our Asian Indian population. And one of the conversations that we've had over the last 4 years that I've been here is matching and it's been brought to my attention multiple times by parents in the district, of matching our staff to mirror or look more like our student population. And what are we doing along those lines? So as we talk about having representative groups, the PTOs, our volunteer groups, our organizations within the district, how are we making sure that our leadership groups within the district are representative of our changing demographic? And is that really happening? And if not, how can we encourage that to happen? When I was questioned about that, one of my responses, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to have this conversation and continue this dialogue, is how do we encourage difference, diversity to represent, to step up? And what are we doing to create a welcoming environment? So as our demographic is changing, and I'll speak for myself, oftentimes it's just an awareness and an understanding and really stopping and listening to understand what other important variables are a part of that culture, and how can we understand and respect different cultures. Because I can tell you statistics, but underneath every statistic of a population is a very vast culture that's rich in difference. And how do we really dig deeper than just the numbers? So as we're working through the feasibility study and working with the board on accepting and celebrating diversity, how are we really paying attention and creating forums that we can listen to one another and build that feeling of belonging?
As a follow-up to that feeling of belonging that you mentioned, over the past several years, the district has asked parents, students, and staff to participate in surveys like Youth Truth and the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, both of which reflect data related to culture, engagement, and belonging. What have we seen in these surveys, and does the data further strengthen the call for us to address diversity in Great Valley?
Absolutely. So the way the Youth Truth Survey that we've looked at, and we've really been using that, we started in 2018 in October, looking at using that as a baseline and saying, how are our students feeling as it relates to belonging? So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the greatest, and it's in a comparative pool with 491 other high schools across the country, the Great Valley High School ranked the level of belonging, again out of a scale of 1 to 5 on a Likert scale, with belonging and peer collaboration at 3.57, which puts us in about the 75th percentile nationally. The measure describes degrees to which students feel welcome at their school and have collaborative relationships with their classmates. So 60% of our high school students ranked the area of belonging in a positive way. 62% of middle school students were positive in this area, and at the elementary level, survey questions were asked that relate to how positive students feel about relationships in their schools. These questions at the elementary level deal with respect and how students feel as though they're cared about. While responses in this area are positive, there were reports that students had incidents of bullying related to gender, learning differences, appearance, socioeconomics, religion, race, and ethnic origin. So as we look at those surveys, and I can tell you, the administrators in our district, we look at those survey results, and not only those within the Likert scale, but the comments. And there are many of our students who are courageous enough to provide their comments, take the time to actually type in and say, there are times that I feel my peers are not being very nice to me, or there are times that I don't feel that I'm respected, or there are times that I feel as though I'm being bullied, or there are times I see classmates being bullied. So we really use that information, and to me, we can say 60% of our students feel as though they have a positive experience. My mind always goes to, what about the 40% who don't? And what can we do to make that number 100% of our students feel as though they're having a positive experience in school? We're spending a lot of time talking about our mental health supports and the level of anxiety, the level of mental health need and support in our schools, and we're a microcosm of what's happening nationally. But we have an opportunity to really look at this data and move the needle in a positive direction and listen to the voices of our students as well as our parents. There are some parents who have shared comments. I don't feel welcome when I walk into some of our schools. We need to make sure we change that. Really, if we're partners in education, we have to go from where we are today to a better place.
We are certainly not the only organization that works around diversity and inclusion. Dr. Wexler, is there anything happening at the state or national level related to diversity that impacts schools?
Sure. So we've been discussing with some of our parents some questions about our discipline rates around expulsion and suspension. And so I just wanted to take a moment to describe what we call disproportionality. So that is a term that is used to refer to districts who are seeing a trend that students by a certain group are disciplined more harshly, or they're represented in special education more frequently than other groups. So typically it's examined by race, ethnic background, limited English proficiency, gender, and/or disability status. So I wanted to just share that there has been discussions, some of you may know, to create a statistic at the federal level that will require districts to use consistently a calculation statistic to determine if they are in fact seeing trends of disproportionality in their school district. At this time, that statistic has not been shared with districts. So we are sort of anticipating that that could happen, and in the meantime, our local intermediate unit, the Chester County IU, has formed a disproportionality task force. And so our district, Great Valley, there are those of us that have participated in that over the year, where we're coming together as a county just to look at our data as Chester County. I do want to share that Great Valley has never been flagged as disproportionate. We do report those statistics to the state and federal level. So that has not been an issue here for the district, but with that said, because we're reporting, we do look at trends in our data. So if we see changes, if we see that there is an increase by a certain disability status or a certain racial or ethnic group, or even limited English proficiency, we do examine that at the administrative level and have conversations. So I think it's important to recognize that while we're perhaps waiting to hear more from the feds about what needs to be done, we are already looking at that, we're discussing it. We know that there is more work to do in that area, which I think is largely part of the reason why we're here. We know, some of the conversations we have at the administrative level is when we are using suspension and expulsion excessively, what kind of climate and culture does that create? And again, we are fortunate in this district where that is not a hugely prevalent issue for Great Valley like it might be in other districts. With that said, we always want to use those more restrictive options as a last resort. So I think we, as a district, want to take a few steps back to say, what else can we do, sort of going to the youth truth surveys and looking at relationships and student belonging, are there practices and procedures we can put in place to just enhance maybe some restorative practices before we need to look at more harsher procedures? And I will share that we do that often, but I always think there's room for us to grow so that we're not reacting to what, is coming down from the government per se. We're already looking at that as a district, and I just think there's continued opportunities to expand upon that. So I think with climate and culture, our big focus now is continuing to look at the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students. And so I think in your next question, I'll wait until you next, but there's a little bit more I can share that's kind of a spring off of that.
So as a follow-up to what you just talked about, in addition to the IU's task force and the work that's happening in the areas you just mentioned, what efforts in Great Valley are happening around meeting the needs of diverse learners outside of a special education program, so that we're seeing a more diversity of learning style or opportunities in the regular education classroom?
Right, so kind of back to that disproportionality statement I made, we're always watching to see, are we seeing certain groups be over-identified for special education services? So we look at that continually. So with that said, and just anticipating we don't ever want to, we want to avoid being in some type of corrective action state, which we're not, but how do we continue to work on that area? We've instituted 2 years ago a pre-referral system, which we call Child Study Team. That has been instituted at elementary and middle school levels, and there is a version of it at the high school level. So the idea is that individuals with different backgrounds in teaching, mental health, social emotional development come together and try to problem solve ways to intervene with a student prior to special education. It could be academic, it could be behavioral, it could be emotional. So when we put processes like that in place, what we see is more increased capacity for our general ed teachers to be able to meet the needs of diverse learners in their classrooms, so that we're not automatically going to things like a referral to special education. So that has been in place, and that's part of our efforts to service students in the least restrictive environment. The other thing I'll mention is there are policies in the district. One of them is our behavior supports policy, and that outlines that we're required to do less restrictive interventions for students in all ways possible. So when our administration and teachers are trained in behavior supports and intervention around behavior, a large portion of that focuses on de-escalation. So how do you de-escalate a situation before you're having to resort to something more extreme like suspension, expulsion, et cetera. So those trainings are ongoing in the district. Several of our administrators and staff have had that training, and then we've offered flex sessions for teachers to continue that work with some of our behavior support specialists. So I think that has been helpful. Lastly, systemically, we're looking at a few other options in the next 1 to 2 years, which is Again, focusing on that school climate piece, and so looking at a social emotional learning curriculum, which we're examining at the K through 5 level, so there'll be a common lesson theme that's integrated into our classrooms to, again, enhance school culture for our students. And then we also are looking at the resilience piece. So I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see Dr. Ginsburg earlier in April. His big focus is around resiliency in students, creating connectedness and fostering relationships with kids. And so it was geared toward parents, but he also does a lot with teachers and administrators. It does come back to relationship with kids. That's such a fundamental piece of helping students with diverse needs. And so we're looking to engage in a more expansive partnership with Dr. Ginsburg next year, which would then help, again, support the adults that are working in classroom with kids and just to create that connectedness relationship component. There's a lot of other things happening at each building, but I think those are just some of the things that we're sort of looking at a district level right now.
Thank you. Certainly, the parent perspective is an important for us, one for us to hear and have conversations about. So, Mrs. Giles, I'm hoping that you will share with us some of the experience you've had or experiences you've witnessed that other families have had that demonstrate a true need for us to be focusing on diversity and inclusion in Great Valley.
Thank you. So I've been part of this district now for 7 years, and, my kids started off in kindergarten, and we're at Charlestown Elementary, which is if you guys don't know, it's the smallest of the 4 elementary schools, and it's almost like more like a private school. But the neat thing is everybody's family, everybody gets along with each other, But unfortunately, it's not always the case for everyone and all kids. I thought long and hard the past few weeks of which experiences I actually wanted to share, which ones I thought would resonate the most. And I said, well, just get the vibe of the audience and something will come to you. But, I don't want to focus so much on, I'll say, actions of the parents and not the children, because the focus here is to make sure that the kids have a great experience at the school, in the school setting. And, parents are going to be jerks, and who's to say if I wasn't an Asian American or, I don't know, Italian, that maybe people wouldn't have the same issues with me personally for being around. But the 2 that I will share, my older daughter, when she was in the 5th grade, there was an incident the last few weeks of school, and she was actually called the N-word in her library class. And, because when I thought about sharing this story, I actually wanted to say the word so that I could see everybody's faces and you could be as mad as I am about it. But I just want you to mentally, picture a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old being subjected to being called that by another classmate. And then to add insult to injury, it came down to a he said, she said. And of course, I'm a good kid. I don't have a bad background, blah, blah, blah. He denied it. So it was like, fine, he didn't say it. The kid was on record going back to the classroom and saying, I got away with it. And he laughed. And because he felt he got away with it, because there was, in my opinion and many others, not proper discipline given to him, I know that his parents, I don't feel his parents were even told, to be honest. And we've had our discussions, this was a year ago. But he proceeded to torment my daughter for the next 3 weeks. No, he didn't drop the N-bomb again, but he would say other very racially insensitive things. And I think what struck me the most about that were 2 things. One was the fact that her classmates, they didn't understand why she was going after him. Why are you trying to get him in trouble? Why don't you leave him alone? He's a good kid. What's the big deal? What's the big deal about it? And then the other one, with us being an Alveus school, if he would have called her stupid, fat, dumb, any other of your more traditional classic bullying comments, there would have been a proper procedure. There would have been something to do with that. There's a precedent, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. And so I'll just pause right there. The second one that I'll share with you is my younger daughter, who is a 4th grader. And recently, within the past, I would say, couple of months, they're going through the Civil War like all the other 4th graders. And she was subjected to being taught about slavery and the Underground Railroad by a video game. And, and I raised, she was mortified. And she said to me, she said, some kids were laughing, other kids were kind of like not paying attention. She said, I spent the whole time trying not to cry. So imagine that, your 9, your 10-year-old being that uncomfortable. You mentioned that one of the growing demographics, I'd say one of the larger, I guess, cultures in our region now is the Asian, Indian, Asian Indian Americans. There was another incident back around Thanksgiving, same classroom, fourth grade, where I guess the teacher had slipped and made the comment about, Indians and pilgrims. And my daughter turns back and she looks at the girl. She's like, why are you so upset? What's the matter? And she says, I had no idea my people were slaughtered here. So my daughter, my 10-year-old goes, no, she means Native Americans, not Indians. It's not you. So, I share that story to say there's a deep dive that's needed, not just in the curriculum, but also, I guess, in how we interact with others, I personally feel that the district blew an opportunity with the little boy who said the N-word to kind of set a precedent, like, look, this isn't going to be tolerated. And I know that during that same week, another kid in my daughter's class, at the time, fifth grade class, had dropped the F-bomb, and he was suspended pretty much on sight. So, you've got a precedent for the F-bomb, but the N-word, we're still a little uncomfortable. We don't know what to do about it. And that's why I'm happy that we're having this discussion, because these are the conversations I think that the district needs to have. There are so many different cultures that are here. It's not just an African American thing or an Indian American thing. We've got different religions. For what it's worth, you've got vegetarians. That there's a daughter, there's a little girl I remember one of my kids when they were in the second grade. If she would have took the survey, she personally felt bullied because she was a vegetarian. And we just have to create an environment where everybody feels a little bit more comfortable. I don't think any child, any person really, should be made to feel uncomfortable during a school lesson, and we have things coming up like World War II and the Japanese encampments. How is that going to be managed? I'm not from this side of the state. I've only been out here since '98. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it was a predominantly Jewish environment and surroundings, my K through 12. I was maybe one, if I was lucky, of 3 Gentiles in the room, and I learned about the Holocaust in a way that was empowering, I guess, and it was taught so gingerly. And I think to myself, geez, every kid in America should learn about these sensitive topics the same way that I learned about the Holocaust. So.
Thank you for sharing your stories. Diana, one of the other perspectives that's really invaluable to us is the student perspective, and we so appreciate you being here with us tonight. What do you notice about the culture of Great Valley School District as it relates to diversity and inclusion? And what experiences or observances have you had that you would like to share related to that topic?
So perfect. So as I explained, I am Mexican. So both of my parents are born and raised in Mexico. So within my house, I always speak Spanish. So from that, I'm bilingual. So as I was explaining before, I talk a lot, and I get to I spend a lot of time with the ESL students because I tutor them, and they reach out to me sometimes through Snapchat and other forums, say like, hey, I need your help. Can you come in at this time and help me out? So within this, I have observed a very large educational gap within their basic knowledge that they need. So actually this past week, I was helping this one kid with proportion problems. So it was like fractions, percentages, and things like that. He was having a hard time with this. And then from that worksheet that we finally finished after a few times of explaining multiplication and addition and things like that, and also how fractions work, even just like that, I had to go through every single small step of math with him. And then we had to work on a worksheet about asymptotes, which is this graphical algebraic thing. So when they don't even understand proportionality and fractions and multiplication correctly, how do we expect students to understand asymptotes? So it's just something that I've been noticing and picking up through the whole time when I've been helping them out. So that's just something that I've observed within the ESL community, and also outside of that, they have a very good community built in within that room, and I love it. I always go in there, and it's very vibrant. It's amazing. They all feel it's like a family in there, honestly. But then once they leave the room, I feel like they're a bit more isolated, and that's another thing I would like to break down, because I feel like it's like you're a new student to a school, but then you also have a language barrier. And that is something that is so hard on them. And so not only is it hard to meet new people for the reasons that you don't know anyone, but you don't know the language either. You don't know how to communicate with them. So it's a big issue. So I was brainstorming with the ESL students, with the ESL teachers, and we were thinking of just educating them about our culture, having more events where we can bring them together. So we're thinking of having like dance lessons, because in the Latino culture, dancing is this huge part of it, and we love dancing. So we're thinking of having like dance lessons first period where they have an ESL class, and like just starting to get them more integrated into our community and having them more integrated into clubs and stuff. So. And then for me personally, being a Mexican, I've always liked to push myself academically. So one of my stories is, as I said, I was in the ESL system when I was in elementary school. So I'd always be in those like separate classrooms, getting my English back to the same level as my peers, and I'd always like be taken out of class a bit to work on my English skills and things like that. And as I kept working, I worked really hard, and now that I'm in high school, I'm taking almost all APs. But I always look around through my entire 3 years so far of high school, there has not been a single Latino student in any of my classes. So I've always been the only person there represented. So that is another issue I'd like to address, because I know that we can do these courses, and I know a lot of my peers and my Latino peers are capable of doing these courses, yet we don't have that representation. So yeah. And then another small aspect is that in the last presidential elections, we had Trump being elected, and one of the few things that he'd say is he'd call Mexicans rapists and etc. And once he got elected, throughout the halls, I was getting a lot of comments like, oh, you're going to be deported, or like, go back to where you came from, or like, they're going to build a wall, and all these comments. And at first, I was just brushing them off because it's just like, oh, they're just jokes. But after a bit, they started hitting a bit more. So that's just another thing. I feel like in our school, we are very, very good with including people of different diversities, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And the people that said those comments to me, it's a very small population of them. But once they are able to say those things, and as you were saying with the story, they don't really get anything from it, they don't get in trouble or anything because it's just a joke, then other people think it's okay to joke about them as well. And then they go with that mentality into the real world where they can say all these comments and not get punished for it, and then it just doesn't make an inclusive environment. So yeah.
Diana, I know too that you mentioned when you introduced yourself that you are involved with the Multicultural Student Union and the Latino Union. I know that Gideon, unfortunately, something must have come up and he's not able to join us, but he was going to talk from his perspective too about inclusiveness as it relates to our LGBTQ community. And there are other clubs or student-led organizations in the high school that work on inclusion for diverse populations of students. Could you just talk a little bit more with us about the goals of the organizations you work with and what you're doing to create a more inclusive culture, what changes you've seen, and what things specifically you think, in addition to the ones that you just referenced to, as an entire school community, we could work on to build a more inclusive culture?
Yeah, of course. So specifically with the Multicultural Student Union, we work on educating people about different cultures. So we go out to Heritage Fest. This year we went to Sugartown, and we also, I believe, we went to, I think it was Charlestown. I forget. I couldn't attend that one. But so we do these Heritage Fests to just teach people about our cultures, because I feel education is a major step into integrating people. Because once you know more about where they came from and about what they are like, what their home life is like, then they're not as afraid or something of the diverse people in their community. So that's what we do with them, and we just have a lot of conversations about what we experience throughout our day at the school with any racism or like like being treated differently due to any diverse aspects of yourself. So those conversations I always like, because sometimes we had a blonde student one time speak up because she's in all these good courses, but a lot of people just see her as a white blonde person, and they don't think she's intelligent, yet she always talks about these things. So a lot of times we focus in a lot in the minorities of diversity, and I do this myself, but diversity is so much more than that. It's all the prejudices that people may hold for people. So yeah. And then with the Latino Student Union, once again, we just try to make a community for ourselves and also educate. So right now we're working on a mural to put up in the hallway. So we're painting it all. So we have like pictures of the food that we eat, like some dances, like some traditional dances, some the animals and plants that we see in our countries, and it's just this really pretty mural that we're working on. So I think that'll be a cool addition in the hallways. And then what was the other club that I had to address? Was it the which one? Oh, yes. And I know this is more of Gideon's side, but I believe it's my bad. He's the president of the GSA. So that's more for, as you were saying, the LGBTQ community. So I personally don't experience a lot of this, but I know we had a conversation after a meeting we had at school about people using the word gay as a joke and words along with that. And for both of us, we hear it a lot, and we both try to speak up about it because it shouldn't be something that's joked about, and it shouldn't be seen in a negative way either. So we had a conversation about that and how we, once again, just need to start educating people that that's not a word that we should be using in our daily language, and we shouldn't normalize it either.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Mrs. Swan, as a newer member of the school board, you expressed your interest in this topic and some of the work that's been happening. But could you just tell us more about the kinds of discussions that are happening so far during your tenure to address the topic and to focus on creating a more inclusive culture?
First, I want to thank Diana. Thank you very much for being so courageous and telling us all that's going on in the schools from your point of view. It was really enlightening, so thank you. And I think as a board, to start, I would say we welcome this information, and as information, I've heard information tonight and over the past weeks. Some of it's painful, and none of us want to hear that. We don't want to hear it if it's happening. We want it to go away. We don't want that to be the case for anyone in our district. As a newer member, something I participated in over the past 2 years is a retreat that happens every January for the board, along with the district and building administration. So it's probably, 30 or 40 people there, 50 people there. And one of the things we did this year was a real deep dive on some of the demographic data that the superintendent has just shared with us to make sure everybody, and we have these meetings every, twice a month, there's a school board meeting, but we don't have necessarily all the time to spend hours looking at that data. And we did at that meeting, together with the administrators of the district and the buildings, and looking at how things have changed in our district or stayed the same, but from a racial diversity, from a socioeconomic diversity. It was very eye-opening and made us ask a lot of questions of, something you mentioned earlier was the diversity of teachers, right? What can we do to have more diverse teachers? How do we, what can we do to have a more diverse board? What can we do to look at our curriculum even? Our curriculum changes all the time to keep up with the times, and I think I've learned that as a parent with even two kids just going through 3 years apart, you see how things change, which is great. But what about curriculum change for diversity? I know that I have family members and friends in other districts that are more diverse or have been diverse a longer time, and sometimes they offer courses in their cultural classes or classes related when they're doing their reading in English or they're doing social studies. They have classes that are more specific or related to opening people's eyes around different cultures. And so I think that's something we all want to see explored, and I know that was a discussion coming out of that meeting. As well, I would say something besides the curriculum for the kids, also just making sure that we're educating our teachers as how to work in a more diverse environment and make sure that everyone's respected and welcome and deal with some of the issues and prevent those issues that you two have both so courageously spoken about. One final thing I'd like to mention that Diana brought up a little bit is equity. So for me, that means specifically your example of, not having other kids who look like you in your AP class. I personally mentored students in a program called Chester County Futures in neighboring districts, not in this district, and was shocked to see these high school students who were in 10th or 11th grade from other cultures, Hispanic or other cultures, and didn't know what an AP class was because their parents didn't know about it, no one ever told it to them, they didn't know it's possible. And by 10th or 11th grade, it's sort of too late to start looking at those. You need to be aware. And we have had those kind of discussions, certainly at the board level, about equity and making sure everyone's aware of the opportunities. And I remember recently we heard that there's been some effort at the 8th grade level to make kids more aware of the tracks that you can get into in high school. And we talked about that at a board meeting. Someone brought that up, which is important. But I believe as a board member, we can even do more to make that happen even earlier, because part of honoring and respecting diversity and welcoming it is also making sure everyone has the same opportunities. And I think me and other board members feel that that's not always so easy for them to find out if their parents weren't brought up here, don't know about that, or didn't have those same opportunities. So it's definitely been an ongoing thread in my first year and a half now on the board, and I'm glad that we're having this tonight and that this is going to lead to a group that's going to get together more regularly so that we can hear from the community and take on these issues.
I think it's safe to say that we've scratched the surface of a lot of issues that fall under this work. So Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky, as we move ahead into the summer and into the next school year, could you outline for us the next steps for this important work and what the community can expect to see?
Absolutely, and I think I would be negligent in not sharing the work that has been happening over the last 2 years. This is not a new topic by any stretch, and we've been working internally with the Delaware Valley Consortium for Equity and Excellence, which is a number of districts participate. Our administrators have been working with their buildings at each of the levels, and one of the things that I think really hits home, because again, we can talk about numbers and we can talk about changing demographics, but to me, the voices of the students are really powerful. And not long ago, a student had shared with me, I meet with groups of students on a regular basis, and a student had shared with me, Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky, do you have any idea how difficult it is to be poor in Great Valley? And one of the other students said, it's much easier to be poor in Coatesville. I left that conversation. There was a lot of other conversations happening and a lot of really rich information shared. But to me, that was very powerful. And our students are incredibly courageous. Our parents are incredibly courageous. And I think sometimes the first reaction we have when we hear something is to defend it, or to provide information, or to negate it, or to give another side of the story. And moving forward, there's not room for that. There's not room to defend. We need to listen and grow together. So moving forward, this again, as Ms. Blake had shared, this is the beginning of our external partnership, bringing the community, the parents, and the internal group together, take some of the work that we've started and work together to form a council of diversity and inclusion. The call to action for folks in this room, as well as folks outside of this room, is to apply to become part of the council. What that council will do is set the agenda moving forward to focus on ways in which we can maximize our belonging of all in the district. And I know, Ms. Blake, in the sign-in sheets, there is the information as to the why. I think the voices we've just heard, there's no doubt there's a need. And our why is to truly increase the feelings of belonging for everyone who walks in and around our schools, both little people, our students, and big people, our parents and our staff. So that said, you will have access to the applications to join the council, to apply to be a part of the council. Just as we've done with other councils in the district, it will be representative. We will truly work to strategize representation from all areas of our district, each of our buildings, as well as for diverse areas to be represented. Being a part of the council is not the only opportunity. As we discussed tonight, there's a lot of work to do. So in the story that Tia had shared with curriculum and sensitivity to curriculum, I am completely confident that there are areas of our curriculum that are being taught on a daily basis that are not as culturally sensitive as they need to be. That said, I know that there is no one doing a deep dive for that cultural sensitivity. Part of the Delaware Valley Consortium of Equity and Excellence, they have a group that works with districts to look at that, a strand to look at curriculum. So that would be one subcommittee of the council that would look at cultural sensitivity as it relates to curriculum. Access and opportunities as it relates to high rigor. How do we look and tap students on the shoulder that show a trajectory of academic acuity, academic achievement in grades 3 to 5, that we want to tap those students on the shoulder and say, it appears as though you have great propensity in the area of academics. Have you considered advanced courses as you move on to high school? And really work with those students to get them to a level, as was shared by Diana, we can't expect students to close the gap on their own, and we can't expect students to be responsible to help each other. That's our job. So that would be another area. The area that Dr. Wexler talked about in discipline, in disproportionality as it relates to discipline, and to have a committee or a subgroup that would look at that. We have all of the systems in place to do the analysis. What we need to do is take it a step further and say, so what do we do about it? When the data shows us something that we're not comfortable with, instead of dismissing it and making excuses for it, or admiring it, which oftentimes we admire problems and talk about all the potential reasons that they may exist, but to get to the next step and say, what can we do about it? What can we do to change that in a positive direction to move forward? So we will be looking, there'll be a subcommittee looking at discipline and as it relates to equity and excellence. Then finally, a subcommittee to look at disproportionality as it relates to referrals for special education or toward pre-referral systems like the Child Study Team. There are, and I'm sure you've seen it, again, we're a microcosm of the larger society. So if we see disproportionality, more students being referred of a certain race or of a certain ethnic background to special education, are we sure that our system is sensitive to provide the supports prior to that referral? And if not, what can we do differently? So much work to do. The first step is that application to the council. We will be taking a team. There is an equity workshop that will be taking place July 10th and 11th, if I'm correct. We will be taking a team to that workshop. That will be held at that will be held at Lower Marion High School. Such a large turnout that they've actually moved the venue. So we will be attending as a large group. This is one of the series that many of us have attended up to this point. But a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to do that work with all of you and with our team.
Before we close this evening, based on some of the comments other panel members have made, I just want to give the opportunity for any of our panel members to say anything else related to this work that may have popped into your head, comments you'd like to make.
I guess the big thing, the only thing I want to say is I'm so excited to see my village. Because you deal with all these situations and you feel like you're isolated or alone, or that it's just me or it's just my child. So it's kind of nice to feel the support here today, so thank you.
I echo that sentiment. Thank you.
When you were talking about the parents and education, so I've actually, yesterday I had a meeting with the ESL teachers, so we were talking about things we could do within the high school to start making the ESL students more integrated into the community. So I'm actually going to be so there's an English class for any of the ESL parents. So I'm going to be, the first week, I'm going to be presenting to them about the American education system, so about AP courses, College Board, colleges, also like how Skyward works, Canvas that we're starting to use, and all those like small little things that are being used in our school that they might not know about, and just so that they can help their children more as they're going through public education. And then also within the ESL room, I'm going to be having signups for any AP student that can help out the ESL students, because these AP students, they have a good grasp on the material that they need to know. So I was talking with the ESL teachers, they don't know all the curriculum that they need to be able to help these high school students. Yet if I can reach out to other students that have a good base of that education and they can properly educate other people about it, I think that's another good way that we can start closing that education gap that we see in the ESL students. That's two small things I'm working within the ESL classroom to help just integrate them more into our community, so yeah.
I just have to say, I'm reminded of, and I believe it was a second grader, Mrs. Morris will keep me honest here, I believe it was a second grader at Heritage Night who sang a song to the entire student body. It was not a planned song. He was on his ukulele, I believe, is that accurate? He was playing a ukulele, and he had practiced a song on the ukulele, and that was his first song, which was in the program. And then he took it upon himself to sing another song. So was anyone there that evening? I found that so incredibly powerful. He took it upon himself to look out in the audience, and I believe he was probably this tall, and he took it upon himself to look out in the audience, and he said, as I look out among all of you, there is so much difference, but tonight we're all the same. And he sang the most beautiful rendition of What a Wonderful World. Completely accurate on his ukulele. So I have to say, if a second grader can take that initiative on his own in front of all of the peers of the school, sitting right in front of him, I think we can do better. And I'm excited for the challenge, and I look forward to working with you.
I just want to wrap up tonight to thank all of you for joining in this conversation, especially Mrs. Giles and Diana. Your courage is inspirational, and you're so smart. I also want to once again thank the community for joining us tonight. Certainly a room full of people on June 4th is nothing to think lightly about. As Dr. Speaker Paulo Pinsky said, the follow-up to this meeting will be an invitation for our community to join the Council for Diversity and Inclusion. More information about that council, its mission, and an application are now available online on our website. If you go to gvsd.org/CDI, Council for Diversity and Inclusion, you will find that application. I also want to remind you that we've recorded this evening, so in a week or so, it will be available on our website and on GVTV. Again, thank you, and we wish you a good night. We look forward to the work that's to come.
Have a great rest of your year.